Hello, I'm the pianist and composer. Yes, popular too. No, that's actually my ancestor, Orlando Gibbons. But who knows, perhaps one day. If you're not familiar with my social media channels or coming to my concerts, let me just quickly tell you that I'm a pianist who has specialised in various composers through the years. For 16 years, I gave all Gershwin concerts at the Queen Elizabeth Hall in London, transcribing Gershwin's original recordings. I've also recorded the music of Charles Valentin Alkan, Chopin's friend and next-door neighbour. I've played his Etudes Opus 39, complete in concert halls around the world, including at the Queen Elizabeth Hall in London and in New York and elsewhere. I also write music. My composing got a kickstart when I was nearly killed in a car accident in 2001. I had time on my hands after that, during which I was recovering. I began writing a lot of songs. I've since gravitated to writing piano music, and now I regard writing music as one of the most important things I do. And so I'm going to be talking to you on this channel about some of my music, amongst other things. But before we get there, let me just show you a few things from my studio, because I'm talking to you from my music studio in the wilds of the mountains of Appalachia in the United States. It's wonderfully quiet here, more bears than human beings. And in this music room, I have a collection of all kinds of things. Chopin's Death Mask, I don't know if you're familiar with this chap. Let me thoroughly recommend him to you. His name is, you may not have heard of it, Ludwig van Beethoven. This is his life mask. Can you see, you get this 3D effect. If you were sitting in a concert hall and he was performing at the piano, you would have had that profile. I thoroughly recommend his music if you're not already familiar with it. And I have a large collection of unusual books. One of my favourite books is this one here. I'll tell you why. It's called The Life of Chopin. It's an original edition. It's by Frederick Niecks, the Scottish writer. This is an 1888 edition. I picked this up in a second-hand bookshop in Oxford, England. And the reason I bought it, I think it cost me a lot of money. I think almost as much as £5. And the reason I bought it, because I already actually had this in my possession, but not this particular copy, which is invaluable because inside is an inscription in ink from the owner of this book. I'll read it to you. It says, Edward Henry Wynne Yates, Freethorn Rectory, January 12th, 1890. First Sunday after Epiphany. A most lovely day. Italian sky, birds singing, primroses and anemones out in the garden. But even more remarkable is what is written on page 89. Niecks describes Chopin's concert in 1841 in Paris. The pianoforte performances of Chopin took up by far the greater part of the programme, which was varied by 2 arias. He then lists the artists who also took part in the concert. And he mentions the violinist Ernst. And he quotes the critic Escudier. Ernst's elegy, played by the composer himself in a grand style, with passionate feeling and a purity worthy of the great masters. Escudier, the writer of the notice in the France Musicale, says of Ernst's playing, "If you wish to hear the violin weep, go and hear Ernst." He produces such heartrending, such passionate sounds that you fear every moment to see the instrument break to pieces in his hands. It is difficult to carry further the expression of sadness, of suffering, and of despair. And there's a note in the margin by our Edward Henry Wynyates, little asterisk. I heard Ernst play his elegy at Oxford in 1856, 7 or 8. I endorse Escudier's opinion of his playing. E. H. Wynyates. Isn't that amazing? That little message he wrote in the margin in 1890 about a performance he'd heard in 1856 of someone who played with Chopin has come down to me, and now I own his book and treasure it. So thank you, Henry, for writing that and passing it on to me. I've been told to start this channel from people who enjoyed my talking in concerts. It's very different when you're in front of an audience, talking quite spontaneously. I never prepare my talking when I do my concerts. But without an audience, just staring at a camera, it's not the same thing at all. Maybe these things will get better. But I wanted to start by talking about my Fantaisie. No, my piano piece, Fantaisie. This was composed in the winter of 2020-2021, and I wanted to introduce a new video, a scrolling score video that features lots of fun, bright colours to help you, if you're not familiar with this piece or not familiar with reading music even, to follow some of the themes and motifs. It's a 17-minute continuous piece of music based on two principal themes, which I both heard in a sort of exposition at the very opening. The work began with a chorale. Although this chorale section has less to do with the remaining work, I kept it in the piece. It actually appears near the beginning with figuration on top like this. But the piece really got going with this idea. At the same time, I was working on something quite different, this idea. And this was eventually refined into the 10-measure theme that appears at the very beginning of the work. That other figuration eventually became the second theme. With a transformed rhythm, it becomes the central theme of the work. big climax in the middle. The easiest way to understand the structure of my Fantaisie is to look at an image of the waveform created from an audio file. If you look at this, you can quite clearly see the three big climaxes of the work, and also the way it begins and ends very quietly. The piece is, I suppose, in a sort of arch form, by which I mean it's symmetrical. It rises up to a central climax. The beginning and ending mirror one another. It's a crude way of describing a form, but it's the best I can come up with. I'm not going to influence listeners with a story of the piece or with a psychological background of the piece. I think that's very much for the listeners to make up their own mind if they wish to do so, or perhaps they just prefer to have abstract music as I do. Of course, there is a feeling of narrative in this piece. Several people have commented to me that when it's over they feel they've been on a journey. I'm not clear whether the journey is a good one or a bad one. The piece ends ambiguously.